it possibly was between a half an hour to an hour. I think that I looked at the clock because there was a clock in there the entire time, and I believe it was around 45 minutes. It was something like half an hour to 45 minutes. And I asked him to come back to the room so I could give him more information, and he never did. The other thing that he had is he had a bunch of papers with him, and he was looking through a file, but I didn't even think to ask him if I could look at the file, but he was just looking at these documents, and then I think he had a notepad out and he was taking notes. Actually, I'm not even sure. He only had maybe a couple of documents. It wasn't like he had a big stack of things, because later in the hearing he had this huge stack of materials which he had never brought into that room when he met me first. He just had like a couple pieces of paper, from what I remember, and a notepad, and then he started taking a couple notes of things that I was saying. But his entire emphasis, I told him that I had gone there with my son and asked for political asylum, and his entire emphasis was, had I been trying to be an illegal immigrant? And my entire explanation to him was that I was asking for political asylum. And then he kept talking about this insufficient funds thing, and I just said, you know, I had enough money to get over there, and then I asked for political asylum. It wasn't a matter of whether I had insufficient funds or not. But that's what he brought up. So then, I mean, I really didn't talk to him hardly at all, and I tried to make calls to other law firms there, because I said I wanted to try to find a different attorney that was not appointed by Canada. And I already had a feeling, I already knew that he wasn't working in my interests, my best interests. And the only thing that he said to me that was helpful in any way, I feel, was that, I think it was after the hearing, or possibly in that room, I believe it was in that room, he said, if you go back to Wenatchee, he said I wouldn't go to Wenatchee. He said I would, something about that they would probably lock me up in a mental ward, or try to put me into a psychiatric institution if I went back to Wenatchee. So he was saying something about don't go back to Wenatchee. That's the only thing that he said that I ever felt was potentially a truthful, accurate statement of what kinds of things they would have done to me in Wenatchee had I gone right back there. And so then I had to go back into this room where I was told to wait for a long time, and I sang a song again. There were a couple of other men there. There were different people that liked hearing me sing, so I did sing. I had no other way to pass the time, and some other people enjoyed it, or, you know, acted like they did. So I did a little bit, but really in that location I didn't that much. And then that was the next time I was assaulted with technology. Was in that section of the immigration center in Vancouver. So when I was in that holding room with the other Asian woman, and there were a bunch of people behind the glass who could see us, kind of behind a plexiglass wall thing. During that entire time, there was never any kind of technology assault at all. I don't remember exactly how long I was there, but in that specific room, nothing was done to me that was of a torture nature. However, when they moved me, when they told me to go into this other part of that immigration complex, and it was more of a police sort of station, and then they had separate rooms for speaking, conference rooms, little rooms to talk to an attorney before you then had your case. When we were in that building, I was assaulted with technology when I was there. And it was a couple of the same thing, a couple of quick jolts to my body, which made it very clear that, and it was basically like an electrocution from on the front of my body, wasn't my head. It was kind of more, it was something else. And actually I should mention that before I got to that point, also the United States military just did something probably about 5 minutes ago in a piercing targeting to my left side of my head, and just did that a little bit ago, not completely separate from my ear. And when they have done what they just did to my head, they've done that several times on a repeated basis on other parts of my head, and it's resulted in an enormous, huge swollen up lump on my head, which I've documented when they've done that kind of thing on my blog. They have not, this country has not just done that to me, they've done it to my brother. My brother is Levi Gannon Garrett. And at the same time they were assaulting me to the back of my head, they were assaulting my brother, and he developed this huge, huge bump on his forehead. And then I saw the photo of it. And it was at the same time that I had a big bump on a different part of my head because of repeated jabbing assaults to the back of my head. So that's just to note what kinds of things are happening while I'm even talking right now. And I'm sure that someone will be happy about it because it sounds crazy, but it's not. And it's not just happening to me. So in this Canadian place that was a little more like a sort of a law enforcement section, I was targeted again, and it wasn't to my head, it was to the, sort of the front of my body. Basically affected my whole body. And it was like an electrical jolt of some kind to my entire body. And that happened a couple of times while I was there. I had to use the restroom, and I had to walk down this one hallway past some people. And I remember it happened when I was walking down the hallway to the restroom from the little holding cell that wasn't the attorney room. There was a hall and like a kind of a guard, and there were police walking back and forth all the time. And so there were basically several instances of Canadian collusion and Canadian activity in torturing people. And for all of Canada's claims that they don't torture people, and the fact that they have signed the respective declaration that's required for the United Nations, Canada has a history of working with the United States and with the United Kingdom in conducting research and assaults to people. And even if it's not research, if it's just hate crime because they want to put someone in a certain position, they just hate an individual, they will try to excuse their conduct by calling it classified information. If you don't believe me, type in the name Ewan Cameron, and you will find some horrific experiments that were conducted in Canada by that man. There are still experiments being conducted in Canada, including infecting people with AIDS in Toronto, and then trying out experimental drugs that are going to help them now. Canada is as criminal as the United States and as the United Kingdom. And when they decide that jointly, when they all decide together that they're going to promote a certain family, such as the Middletons, then they all work together to do that. And if they decide they're all going to use hate crime to torture other individuals, then they all work together to do that. So then, after talking to this attorney, what he told me is, when I did talk about the political asylum, at one point he said, if you want political asylum, he said, you would be, he said, we already took, or they, he said they, but it was, he should have said we. They already took my son from me, and they knew that if I didn't have my son with me and he was in a different country, that was the way they were going to try to force me over there. They wanted me to drop my political asylum petition, because, and the only way that they were trying to force me to do it and coerce me illegally was by taking my son from me and putting him in a different country. And then they told me, if you want political asylum, you couldn't get political asylum. You could ask for that here, but it might be 3 years, And your son is in the United States, so what's going to happen to your son? So basically, Ross, in the Penticton immigration place, he said the same thing. After they lied and said I was there on insufficient funds and didn't give my son and I together political asylum, when I asked for political asylum for both me and my child. After that, when they had illegally taken my son from me, then they used that to coerce me and intimidate me and threaten me with regard to the health and well-being of my son, telling me that if I didn't drop the political asylum claim, who knows what will happen to my son, and that I could just wander around crazy in Canada as long as I want. And that's what Ross told me from Penticton Immigration, and that is what this attorney told me in the Vancouver detention place. So basically they said, they told me after they took my son that they basically told me that if I wanted my son back, the only way I could get him back was to go back to the United States. So they had illegally blocked me from making political asylum after they took my son from me, and had illegally refused to give us political asylum when we were together. So then there was this hearing, and what he said is, if you go back to the U.S., he said, we'll just have this hearing. He didn't even explain to me what the hearing was going to be about then. I thought he was still going to bring up political asylum, but he never did. So then the next thing that happened is we were in this courtroom, and that lawyer lied to me, and he didn't show me everything that he was colluding with others against me on. Because when it was our turn to go to the table and sit before the judge, I looked over to the side because this attorney, there was two long tables. I was sitting here on the table. I mean, according to my perception, it's going to be different for you. I'm sitting here, which would be to the left side of the courtroom. He was sitting to my right, over here, and then there was an aisle, and then there was the other table over here, and it was just the one guy who was the attorney for Canada, and then there was a judge in front of us. So it's sort of a typical courtroom setup. And then there were a couple of guards in the room who, you know, since they were guarding the area, they were able to hear the entire thing. So when we got to the table, it wasn't until we were at the table that my attorney then opened up his file, or brought this big stack of information with him, and he was kind of going through it, and I looked over to the side and saw right on the top that it said he had a report. It was an official document written by a Canadian regarding communications they were having with the United States. And this official document said, they say that she is suggestive of having paranoid schizophrenia. So there were officials from Washington State. They basically said the state in the United States. They were categorizing it as the state. I think it was the state or officials. I think it might have just been officials. United States. And it was a Canadian document that said that the information that they had received from the United States was that I was paranoid schizophrenic and possibly on the run from a father, from a paternal interest. So anybody in the United States already knew that that was not true, because there was filed documents that showed there was no paternal interest, and that matter had been closed. And it was also slanderous to tell another country that I had paranoid schizophrenia. because I had never been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And in fact, even when I was in Wenatchee, nobody was saying I was paranoid schizophrenic.